Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to introduce to you the elected officials that are among us today. I'd like to start, of course, we already heard from our wonderful comptroller, Glenn Hager. We have a couple of members of the State Board of Equalization, Aaron Kinsey and L.J. Francis. Now, with Aaron Kinsey, I'm not sure if I want to tell the time because I'm afraid everyone's going to leave to watch this. But I understand that within the next hour or so, he's going to appear on Fox Business about the State Board of Equalization taking their considerable fund that they have to manage and taking it out of BlackRock because they continue to, yes, exactly. They continue to discriminate against Texas Energy. And so it's, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 billion, a lot of money. I think that one hurt a bit. Also with us today from the 12th Court of Appeals, Chief Justice James Worthen. We also have with us today Senators Bob Hall and Kevin Sparks, and it gets better, Representatives Richard Hayes, Terry Wilson, Terry Leo Wilson, Shelby Slauson, Matt Shaheen, and my favorite, the solid, rock-ribbed conservative representative that represents me in the State House, unlike her somewhat squishy rhino husband, Carrie Isaac. I love that. You know, Carrie Isaac came to my door and asked me for my vote. Jason Isaac never did that. So, you know, it's you remember these things. So Texas, as all of you know, is more than a place. It's a challenge to each and every one of us. At Texas Public Policy Foundation, we believe that. When you walk through the hallways of our building at 901 Congress here in Austin, you can feel the energy and the excitement for the mission of making Texas the best place on earth. When I've walked newcomers through the building, I'm often asked, what is a think tank? I mean, what do you think? What are you thinking? All right? It's a think tank. I think when you really look, though, what's behind that question, it's really about, you know, what is it that you do? Do you just think about things? And I think the answer, of course, as most of you know, is no. It's not just that simple. You know, our stock and trade is, in fact, ideas, but we test them. We research the data, we study the historical precedents, and we anticipate all the possible outcomes. One of the things I enjoy talking about, especially, I mean, you heard Comptroller Hager give some justifiable digs to California, and I'm just thinking, man, back when I was on the Budget Committee in California, oh my goodness, what would happen if I was still in? I wouldn't be getting a paycheck for several months as the state's budget was being haggled over for quite a while. And I'm thinking, I'm so glad I'm in Texas. But one of the iron laws of public policy is the law of unintended consequences. And it's not enough that you have good intentions with your lawmaking. What are the outcomes? How does it actually affect people? And so that's something that we really try hard to do at the foundation, is looking at the impact of the ideas that we generate, both good and bad. So, of course, this can be seen most saliently in the comparison between the two most populous states in the nation, Texas and California. Where Texas always seeks freedom, California always pursues regulation. In Texas, we value liberty. In California, they don't value liberty, they subsidize license. It's celebrated. I mean, it's insane. The result, of course, can speak for itself. You see it in the Census Bureau data constantly. It's called the Texodus, where Californians who can't take it anymore, like me, over 12 years ago, pick up and move to the Lone Star State, thanking God that it exists for us to escape to. So, yes. So I invite you to take a look at this next video presentation. It kind of provides a window into how what we do happens, and it was put together by my incredibly talented colleagues within our communications department. I think it'll answer some really interesting questions. Please enjoy.
The story of the Texas Public Policy Foundation is like the story of Texas itself, big and broad with a spirit as big as the Lone Star State. Throughout our nearly 35-year history, TPPF has led the way in providing conservative policy solutions to ensure that all Texans are free to live their lives and raise their families as they see fit. When Dr. Leininger founded TPPF in 1989, Texas had become a judicial hellhole thanks to a tort system that was out of control. And the people who paid the price were the ordinary men and women of the Lone Star State. But TPPF stepped in, advocating for common sense tort reform, which was soon passed by the legislature and signed by Governor Rick Perry. But that was only the beginning. We now fight for liberty in areas from education to border security to healthcare and much, much more. We have even expanded to the national stage with energy and criminal justice. I like to say we provide the powder and the shot to the Texas legislators. Whether it's providing impeccable research, bringing forward expert and knowledgeable testimony, rolling out strategic communications plans, or launching transformational litigation, TPPF fires on all cylinders to see good policy created, enacted, and executed. I've gotten some version of this question many times over the years. How do we do it? As President Reagan used to say, it's amazing what you can accomplish when you do not care who gets the credit. And here at TPPF, we are servant leaders and happy warriors. We see a problem and we set out to solve it. And the foundation of everything we do is our research. It is that foundation that allows us to formulate policy ideas that are conceived by some of the most knowledgeable experts around the country. After that, we don't just cast our ideas into the ether and hope that they get passed. We meet with legislators, the grassroots, write op-eds, provide testimony, host events, and much more. After all, we're not just a think tank, we're a do tank. Even beyond our policy and communications, we bring up the next generation of leaders through our internships, fellowships, and young professionals groups. We have an extremely effective litigation team that has been at the forefront of groundbreaking lawsuits, including the first Commerce Clause victory in decades. Texas is more than a place. It's a challenge to each and every one of us. We have a lot to live up to if we're to carry on the legacy of liberty established by the early settlers and the generations of Texans since. With the generous help of our supporters and partners, TPPF has risen to that challenge. And as we stand shoulder to shoulder with you, we will meet this challenge.
One of the fun parts about that video, with that brief image of the Alamo, and knowing that the foundation has some of its film now playing at the Alamo, to me that is just amazing. Well, I'd like to now introduce our moderator of today's keynote panel. He's Texas Public Policy Foundation's Chief of Communications, Brian Phillips. One of the amazing things about having Brian as a colleague is, man, this guy knows his stuff. Not only did he work in the presidential level of politics for some guy named Ted Cruz, he absolutely knows how to connect our ideas with the public and help us to be more effective. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brian Phillips, who's going to run this panel.
All right, how about TPPF's very own Chuck DeVore? Love that voice. We have Chuck do a lot of voiceovers for us, so every time he introduces me, I feel like I won something on a game show. It's amazing. Well, thank you all for being here today. We're going to have some fun this morning. They intentionally put this panel on Thursday morning, one, to get you all up and out of bed and get you excited, but also to get prepped for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who will be here this afternoon, and get everybody primed. We're very excited about that as well. All right, we have a very fun panel this morning. We're going to talk about, apparently there's some stuff going on in Texas politics that we all need to chat about. Greg gave me the license that I can be just provocative enough not to get fired. So we're going to try that. We're going to try that today. So I don't do a lot of intros, bio stuff. It's all in your pamphlets. But I will introduce them briefly. We have a couple of pollsters, data scientists here with us today. We have Mike Basilis, who I think between the four of us, we have about 100 years of experience. And that's just a fun way of saying we're old, that we have working in Texas. So we have a really great panel today. Directly to my left is Mike Basilis. We have Derek Ryan, who I'm sure about 2/3 of this room, maybe more, are probably on his newsletter that he puts out every day. And then, of course, Alex Muir, who is with WPA, another great pollster. All right, so we will jump right into this. The first thing I want to ask is, I want to get into the data, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the data that drives decisions with campaigns and all of that. But I told you guys on the preview call that we had, is like, I don't know what's going to happen on March 5th, but some things may happen. We may want to talk about what happened. And apparently a lot of stuff happened on March 5th. So I'll just lay that out there in the middle and say, March 5th, were you surprised? Did some things happen that you weren't expecting? Or give me your hot takes on that. We'll start with Mike.
I don't think we've seen an effort against incumbents or by challengers to the level we've seen in this recent election. I mean, there have been times when an incumbent was challenged here and there might be a loss, but usually not. But there was something to rally around, obviously. There was an issue, particularly regarding school choice. We don't say the V word. Very bad, won't say it.
We're going to try and take it back, so we're good.
Shouldn't say a voucher word if you're trying to, what you want to do is let the money that follow the child so that the parents can use that money for the schooling that they think is best for that child. So we had a big issue to which to rally around. Different campaigns worked out differently, clearly. Some incumbents were able to maintain and hang on. Some are in runoff. So not a surprise with the amount of level of activity that we saw.
Derek, I've used the word a change election. Would you go that far to call it a change election?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that heading into early voting, I thought turnout was going to be a little bit lower than it was in 2020, just because there wasn't any glamour at the top of the ticket. No offense to the Railroad Commission and to the judicial candidates, but
I think Wayne might be here. Could be here.
But it turned out that down ballot races actually drove up turnout in the Republican primary. And then on the other side, I was kind of expecting Democratic turnout to be up because they had a contested Senate race. And boy, was I wrong on that one. They failed to show up big time, and it just shows kind of a lack of, enthusiasm possibly on their side. But as it a change, I think so. It sends a message to everybody that you could be a long-term incumbent, but it's still possible that you could get primaried and get defeated if you have some bad votes.
Alex, to that point, a lot of elections are about personality, not policy. It feels like this one may have been the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on what Derek was saying, one of the interesting things to me about this outcome was that the composition of the primary electorate changed a little bit, but not dramatically. What happened was a lot of the people who were traditionally part of the Republican primary electorate changed their priorities and moved the behavior. Often when you see a change election, you see a change in the demography of the voting population. There were a few changes around the edges of the Republican primary electorate, but an awful lot of people made the decision that they were looking for something that wasn't what they had in the going in.
Mike, did anything surprise you coming into the election that you thought, whether it was turnout or that the issues mattered or which issues mattered? Did anything surprise you on Election Day?
It's hard to know because, you know, neither of us are involved in all the races to know exactly what's going to happen. Probably because incumbents have usually over the years done a pretty good job communicating to their constituencies, particularly the Republican primary voting base, and they stay in. To me, the number of losses of incumbents was just a little bit of a surprise. Didn't really know how many it would be, but that was probably the thing, and there's probably a few more to go down. A lot of second place finishers often win in a runoff against the first place finisher, whoever that plurality vote getter is. So there's still some things yet to happen.
So, Derek, they always say it comes down to turnout. You're the guy who does the thankless job of counting the turnout day after day after day going into the election. Was there anything surprising about that? Or Texans, I mean, there's a lot more Texans here. There's a lot more registered voters here. But in terms of turnout, were people excited about the election? Did they show up?
Well, so, you know, I think we're at a point in the Republican primary where 2 million votes is going to be probably the new norm moving forward. You know, we were just slightly under 2 years ago, but we were over 2 million in 2020. We hit 2 million easily this cycle, so I think that's the new norm. But I think it's also worth mentioning that there were also 2 million people who have voted in at least one of the last 4 Republican primaries who didn't show up. And so, you know, we hit 2 million, but, you know, if some of those showed up, we could, you know, get to 2.5 or even higher.
Alex, there was a concerted effort on the part of the left to try and get folks who are not technically Republicans or not of that persuasion to vote in the Republican primary. Did you see any of that? Was there Operation Chaos, I guess is what Rush Limbaugh called it 20 years ago, but was there any sort of left-wing Operation Chaos involved?
Not that was noticeably successful. There are always a few places where you can see it, and there were a couple of districts where it was at least interesting, but on a statewide level, no, they didn't.
No.
That did not work.
Derek has the numbers on these.
Derek, you got the number? You pulled out. I saw you pulled out some data. Let's go.
I actually, I finally got most of the people accounted for who voted in the primary, and about 4.3% of votes cast in the Republican primary were by people who had previously voted in the Democratic primary, and the 4.3% in the Democratic primary were from previous Republican primary voters.
Is that a lot? Like, put that in context for people.
It's actually, I think, down from where it was 2 years ago. And, you know, like I said, with the lack of enthusiasm on the Democrat side, I thought that this might be an election where we might see a little bit more crossover voting, and I don't think we really did.
And just for context, you look, most years you get somewhere between 8 and 10% who have mixed primary vote history, who have voted at least once in each of the parties. So the number wasn't unusual.
We'll get to November in a second, but I do want to bring up an interesting statistic now that you mentioned it. I saw one of the non-pollsters up here put out a public poll that it was just of Democrat primary voters. And amongst Democrat primary voters, Hispanics are only at like 55% with Biden, which is 20 points below other demographics. Mike, is that a harbinger for November?
Okay.
Well, we'll get in November and towards the
Yeah.
end, but what do you think of that?
So I got to go back to 2002, and you may recall the Democrats had the Rainbow Coalition with Ron Kurt running for U.S. Senate and Sanchez running for governor on the Democratic side, and the Republicans were just starting to win all these statewide races, late 90s and the early 2000s. And I got asked by a reporter, what do you think will happen this fall? Well, he said the Republicans will win all the seats. Well, you're just saying that because you're a Republican pollster. I said, no, the pendulum took a while to swing this way, but the last time this state was at parity was 94. In 1994, K. Billy Hutchison won a full term to the U.S. Senate with 62% of the vote. The base Democrat was a guy named Richard Fisher, got 38%. Do you know who the base Republican was then? Tex Azar. He got 38% to Bob Bullock. So we had a good 24% of the people splitting their tickets. And so I said, but now the state leans Republican. It's not a level playing field. Back then, I said, and I had to give the reporter something. I said, by 2030, if Republicans can't get more than 36% of the Hispanic vote in the general elections, the state will come back to parity. Well, along the way to the dance to 2030, what's happened? Hispanics are now voting 42, 43% Republican in general elections. But we're maintaining the same 10% differential in terms of 9 to 10 point Republican advantage statewide. In the urban centers, independent younger females under the age of 55 have a view of the Republican Party that's not very favorable. So we're losing some of these urban suburban females to the Democratic side, and that's kept the state at parity.
Derek, the left likes to say it's not a red state, it's just a non-voting state. How do you respond to that?
If I had $1 for every time I've seen that or heard that, I don't think that. I think that if you don't vote, you're voting.
Is that a coping mechanism on part of the left? Is that what
Yes, you're making the decision not to vote, and I feel like that's the same as casting a vote. You're casting a vote for, what you like about this state, and you're okay with the track that it's on. Otherwise, you would show up and cast your vote for Democrats.
Alex, another one I hear is, this is the year for young people. Young people are going to show up and vote. This is the year we're going to get everybody from Texas State and University of Texas and motor voter and all of that is going to happen. And this is the year for young people. What do you think?
They were saying that when I was in college, which is a long time ago now. We won't get into how far. But, the voting coalitions are changing. To build on what Mike and Derek were saying there, you can see Republican vote is moving more male, it's moving less college, Hispanic vote is changing. We had almost 13% of the votes cast on election day in the Republican primary were Hispanic. That was not the case in 2020. It wasn't even close to the case in 2020. So there's a whole bunch of pieces in motion, but the end result hasn't shifted in Texas. And if, to use Derek's example, if I had $1 for every time someone tells me that the 18 to 24 demographic is going to save them, I have a really nice bridge in Florida I'd like to sell.
But that demographic doesn't have any money and they can't afford a house. So
yeah, that's not going to change the numbers.
So let's get past March 5th, and this is really where I feel like we have a lot of information and kind of insidery stuff to share with this group, with our folks here today. So what are campaigns thinking about now? Like now that you're past the primary, now that you're into the general, I know there's some runoffs and things like that going on, but I think there may be some folks here who have worked on campaigns, which I'm sure you've been part of that as well. But there really is, the data that you provide, whether it's polling or otherwise, the data that you provide really does drive decisions in the campaign. And so some of the time, when you see these ads getting pumped out or you see certain messaging getting pumped out, all of that started somewhere, and it usually starts with the data that folks like our panel provides. So I want you to open the door a little bit if you can. By the way, all these guys are for hire, later if anybody's interested. So, but open that door a little bit and tell us what campaigns are thinking about right now as they go into the general, and how are they asking about the data? What are they, interpreting with the data? Mike, we'll start with you.
I think the three of us could just take this question and individually use up the rest of the time.
Yeah.
There's so
That's
much
my
there.
job, is just to ask questions.
There's so much there because the political environment means so much more now than any individual campaign. And just look at Abbott winning by 11 points in the last election. And he spent, I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars. I don't know, it was 60, 70 million. Two places down on the ballot, Ken Paxton spends maybe $2 million and wins by 9. So what's going on here? And so the political environment means a lot. Biden is in a situation where his job approval is 40%, and it's hard to get reelected if you're not above 50. Clinton just got above 50 in October of 96. George W. Bush got himself back above 50 in the low mid-50s in October 2004. And Obama did the same in October of 2012. And they might slip back down later. Trump wasn't at anywhere close to 50% in 2020, and he got beat. Biden, nowhere close to it. It's very difficult. So the political environment is first and foremost, I think, something that all the campaigns are going to be looking at. And there's going to be, because it's a presidential year, a federal umbrella about some of these issues that are going on. So I'll let Alex and Derek take over there.
So Derek, a candidate, squeaks by in his run or his primary and comes to you and says, "Okay, I'm the nominee. Now what?"
Well, so I think it really depends on where they're running. You know, if they're in an urban or suburban area, you know, they've got an uphill battle to climb to convince some non-primary voters, you know, use a message that appeals to those swing voters. You know, we're not really doing all that well in the Big Five, you know, minus Tarrant County, the Big Five counties. We're doing, you know, I'd say the suburban counties, you know, are iffy, to use a scientific term. You know, it's, some of them are shifting blue pretty quickly. You know, I live right inside Williamson County, and I would have laughed in your face 10, 15 years ago if you had told me that Democrats would get elected or, you know, Williamson County voters would vote for a Democrat. I would have laughed in your face. And we're at a point where, you know, I think Biden may have won Williamson County. I'm pretty sure Clinton did in 16. But, you know, so if you're running in a suburban area, you've got a significant task in convincing swing voters to vote Republican.
So your consultant comes in, Alex, and says that. What do you jump into, and what do you start testing? What do you start trying to figure out to give you the right decisions?
I mean, your first task is to figure out what a winning number looks like. How many likely votes are we looking at? Ballpark. What's the composition of your electorate? How many suburban college-educated women versus how many, you know, Republican primary voters, you know, who with a vote history, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of it is the initial roadmap of what is it that we have to do to get to a number, and then figuring out how to get from the safe minimum you can expect to a winning number, and who is the audience you're talking to. And also, bluntly, in a presidential year, figuring out what's going to happen over your head in terms of presidential, national interest campaigns, senatorial committees, congressional committees. You know, if you have a message you really like and you think will resonate, but every party organization and committee above you is going to be saying something very different, I have bad news about how likely your message is going to be to penetrate. So you're going to have to figure out a different answer, right? It may be a great answer, you may love it, it's still not going to fly.
So that's a good segue into the timing of this, Mike. Like, you don't just like jump out and start, you know, messaging, and, you know, the minute there's a sequence between the primary and the general, and you have to capture people's attention. How do you schedule that?
Well, you really have to work from what we used to say election day backwards. Now it's the first day of early voting backwards. Because I don't know if anybody's ever run an 800-meter race, but it's horrible. You're running at like 96% for 2 laps, and it's just exhausting. But that's what the early voting period is for a candidate, because you got to hit full on at the first day of early voting and then hold that. So you have really, you know, 10, 11 election days, right, with all the early voting points. So work from that point backwards. But who are we talking to? Let me throw it to you this way. I have 3 questions for you. Let's see if you raise your hands. If you typically vote Republican in general elections, raise your hand. Oh, this is a shock. But keep them up, because we won't.
Liars, you're all liars.
Right,
You
so
don't
typically vote Republican,
early
raise your
voting.
hand. Do you have a generally positive view or negative view of the Republican Party? If it's positive, keep your hand up. Keep your hand up if you generally have a negative view of the Democratic Party, not a positive one. You
Keep in mind, we're just the ones on camera, not you. so
You are
you're good.
core
You're good.
Republicans, okay? If you generally vote Democratic, a negative view of the Republican Party and a positive view of the Democratic Party, you're a core Democrat. And in the state of Texas, that's about 34% core Republican, about 28, 29% core Democrat. It's those people that are inconsistent. It's a way to build another independent model that we look at, because those are the ones that determine the outcome in close elections. Statewide, we still have a 10-point advantage. The reason why the 2018 race was close for U.S. Senate is because a number of those independents, particularly in the urban, suburban areas, were 20, 22 points more for Beto O'Rourke than they were for Senator Cruz. And it was a midterm of the Trump election. So we really want to talk, and Alex alluded to this, we really want to talk not early on, because nobody's really paying attention until you get into late September, to those independents. Many of us in Republican politics that are helping Republican candidates find our candidates want to talk to the base.
Yeah.
They're going to, 98% of the core Republicans, you're going to vote for the Republican nominee in this room, no matter who it is. And the core Democrats are going to vote for Biden if he ends up, unless something happens at the convention and he steps aside.
So is swing voting not really a thing in a place like Texas?
We don't have as much swing voting, but we have people that are self-proclaimed independents, and those are the ones we should be speaking to. People didn't recognize it, but in 2016, Trump was winning the independent vote. Even in the ABC Washington Post poll that came out a couple days before the election. Wasn't reported. Exit polls, Trump's winning the independent vote. In 2020, Biden was winning that independent vote. That's where it all comes down to now.
Well, that was fun. Derek, do you have a question for the audience? No, I'm just kidding. But early voting, I mean, that's something that you are on top of. Does that help or hurt one party or the other?
I think that it probably helps Republicans now, just because, we beat the Democrats in turnouts by, I think, 1 million votes. So, the core Republicans, the core Democrats. So, 98, 99% of the people that voted in March, they're going to show up in November without contacts. So, we get them in the doors as quickly as possible. That's always a good thing. There's been some talk about shifting away from voting by mail in the Republican Party. That's kind of taken a hit, and we've seen it in the numbers. I think that in previous cycles, 100,000 ballot by mail votes in the Republican primary. We were at 40,000 this year, and those are votes that we get in the door before polling places even open. And so, I think we've got to get a message out to our voters that it's okay to vote by mail. It's secure in Texas. We've put in some additional measures to make sure that that's the case, because every vote we get in before the polling place opens, that saves all of the candidates from having to contact them through the remainder of early voting and up to Election Day.
Well, I hate to infect this fun political discussion with a policy discussion, but do you think that voting by mail is secure? I mean, in your estimation?
I think that there are still some things that we could do to improve it, but asking for Social Security number and driver's license information, I think, has helped make sure that the people who are filling out the applications are indeed that specific person. I'd like to take it a step further and make them put their DPS audit number on their, that's on their driver's license, that absolutely no one outside of DPS and the card holder knows, and have that put on the application.
Alex, I want to get a little nerdy into, because pollsters are doing a lot more sophisticated data collection and evaluation than they were 5-10 years ago. It's not just about going out and running polls. You're actually keeping records on folks, and you're analyzing all that, who votes and who doesn't vote. You do a lot of, and there's something that maybe people aren't familiar with, but modeling of the various the electorate, essentially, and trying to essentially guess whether or not they're an early voter, or they're a primary voter, or they're an election voter. Talk a little bit about what you guys do at WPA to try and find voters.
Well, I mean, one of the issues that we had when I started in politics was you didn't know enough about most voters, right? I mean, you had party registration maybe, you had some vote history, but you didn't really know much about them beyond that. We kind of have the opposite problem. There's actually too much information floating around, and the problem is how do you prioritize? Thankfully, we've invented enough machine learning tools now that I don't have to do it all myself. Hooray. So the goal of scoring voters is just to try to get as much usable information on people you haven't actually spoken to yet, basically. I mean, the gold standard would be to go and talk to all 16 million voters, but I haven't yet found anybody who wants to pay for that. So we have to do the other thing, which is where you talk to a representative sample and you model the rest. So the goal is to try to, for example, put a turnout score to people so we can sort of basically sort our voters, potential voters, maybe voters, and our no voters. And then depending on what your campaign's win condition is, you can set the floor of how far down the desperation tree do you need to go to get to a winning number. You know, there are some districts where it's not going to happen. I have some bad news. And then there's some districts where, yeah, we can win, but you're going to have to turn out people who we ordinarily wouldn't spend money on. And this sort of, to build on something Mike was saying about swing voters, one of the swing constituencies is people that dip in and out of the electorate, right? They're registered to vote, but they're not consistently, their behavior is not consistently that of voters, right? I mean, everybody in this room is going to vote hell or high water, and we love you, and campaigns are usually wasting time and money if they're talking to you.
I never get any campaign mail ever at my house. I never get a call, I never get a door knock,
Yeah,
nothing.
when I do, I judge the candidate harshly. But there is a significant chunk, especially of the Republican potential coalition, which is a sort of a low involvement voter. And if you're talking about some of our suburban counties, we need to get better about understanding those people and getting in touch with those people and treating those people and spending less time talking to the converted, right? I mean, we don't need to be worried about ginning up the base. The base is the base for a reason. They're going to vote in those districts. There's a time and a place for that, right? I mean, raising money, raising enthusiasm, working on legislative lobbying, but on election day in November, we love you, but you're already accounted for.
Like, Alex brings up a good point. What happens when you have to have that tough conversation with a client? When you have to say, hey man, you're not at 50+1, you're under that.
We're like X-ray technicians, we're radiologists, we're surgeons, we're part of a team, and I don't know, but I don't have to have necessarily good bedside manners. And say, I did a survey for Ed Bloom, who led a redistricting lawsuit back in the 90s because he didn't know when he was running against Craig Washington down in Houston. I did a survey for him. He started out at 32% on the first ballot after we said all the things about Craig Washington's record and all the things Ed would do in Congress. On the informed or second ballot, Ed was at 36%. And the consultant standing right behind him, the general consultant. And I'm packing up my things, and Ed says, well, tell me, Mike, am I going to lose in November? Yeah.
The patient.
And that's when he started to learn that districts are made to be won or lost by the way they're drawn. I didn't understand that when I was 26 years old and worked on my first congressional race against Jake Pickle. Some of you remember that name here in Austin, right?
I told you we were old. Come on.
Yeah. And so, and then I come along to 2001 and I work with the Texas for Lawsuit Reform and others to give us a plan in the minority in the state house by meeting. Nobody ever really asked Republican reps, what would you like to see in a plan? So we had to come up with a alternative to the Pete Laney plan. And you know, a lot of things changed there, and we started winning races because of the way they were drawn. So a candidate owes it to him or herself to look at a district before they decide to run in it and see what is the vote behavior of this district, and go from there.
Derek, have you ever had to resuscitate a patient?
Say that again?
Have you ever had to resuscitate a patient?
Yeah, so I think that, yes, I have, and it makes it difficult, you know, with the reporting of data during early voting. You know, I can see who's showing up, who's not, and, you know, when when the base on our side is, running neck and neck with the base on the Democrat side, or if we're in the hole, I'm like, things aren't looking good.
Yeah.
You've got to figure out a way to increase the margin of our base, or find some swing voters, and I don't see any swing voters. So,
a lot of times, campaigns or others will use ballot initiatives to try and get turnout. Have you seen that be effective in Texas politics? Is it, people don't necessarily know the person that's running in their district, but they want to go vote for, either some sort of, ballot initiative on abortion or taxes or school choice or whatever. Does that generate more enthusiasm for one party or the other?
I'm not sure that it does. Everybody in this room, we're not normal, and that's no offense intended by that. But we're thinking about politics 24/7. 12 months a year, 24 months during the election cycle. Every single day, we're thinking about politics. There's a significant portion of the Republican primary electorate that aren't. And, like Mike said, you work from election day or from early voting back, there are probably a significant number of people that show up to vote for, in the Republican primary that don't even realize that there are going to be initiatives at the bottom of the ballot. Yeah. So, it might be one of those things where maybe it's time to start investing a little bit of money in advertising the fact that these initiatives are on the ballot.
Let's just, and Alex, let's just rip the veneer right off. Do issues actually matter? Do the policies and what people stand for, in your experience, how much does that actually matter going into particularly a general election?
Either an awful lot or none at all. On the subject of the fun patient conversations, one of the great ones is always when you have to tell people that no one knows who they are, because everybody has this inflated idea of what their name ID will be. Well, I was their state rep. Yeah, I have bad news. That doesn't mean a lot.
You're just being honest. You're not being mean.
No, I'm not.
These are tough conversations you have to have.
You need to have a clear-eyed understanding of how to get to 50% plus what. And if you're Donald Trump and everybody in the country knows who you are, then you get to skip over the name ID entirely and move on to the next thing. Everyone else doesn't have that. So that's one of the honesty things that has to happen, is be clear-eyed about where you are, and remember that there's some pretty good research that says most people think about politics less than 10 minutes a week. So we're all really weird. Just accept that. But that means, okay, of that 10 minutes, 8 minutes is Biden and Trump. And of the other 2 minutes, it's everything else that's happening. You're going to get 15 seconds. Right? So how do you
So then is it personality? Hey, I'm a likable person? Is that?
Or it's connecting yourself to an issue that person cares about, or like this is where the art part happens as opposed to the science. You have to start to figure that out. Generally, candidates are going to impact the outcome of a race somewhere between 3 and 7% on the final ballot. So if you're in a D+40 district, I have some bad news. No matter how charming you are, it's probably not going to be enough. But the art form is trying to figure out, is the issue a way to get that connection? You're trying to build an emotional connection, right? You're trying to get people to do something you can't pay them to do and they don't have to do.
And Mike, part of that you see is, if it's not about issues and they're getting 10 seconds to say like me, a lot of what they talk about is who likes them, right? Which is the endorsement game. You see that a lot. How much does that play into people's opinions about whether or not to support somebody?
Well, endorsements can matter, but they don't. I'll tell you what doesn't matter. We tested this back in Rick Perry's race against Kay Bailey Hutchinson. I helped Kay Bailey in her early races, and then she ran against Rick Perry, as you all know, in 2010 for governor. And Kay Bailey was getting all the endorsements of the press, the newspapers. So we tested around the state of Texas. If you live in the Dallas area, would you be more likely or less likely to vote for a candidate who was endorsed by the Dallas Morning News? If it was Houston, the Houston Chronicle. Turns out Republican primary voters were 38% less likely to vote for a candidate endorsed by their newspaper and only 14% more likely So, sorry, press out there. People endorsements matter. Now, what does matter, as we've seen in primaries, getting the endorsement of governor, lieutenant governor, Trump makes a big difference. It carries a lot of weight. It tells people quickly, oh, you're one of us. You've been brought into the family and into the fold.
And so they don't even have to discuss issues at that point. They just say, the people that you like me, so show up.
This cycle, I don't know what Alex saw in his polling, but this cycle, more than any other previous cycle, endorsements carried as much weight in some of the races I was in, if not more, than the positions that the candidates held.
Derek, the left has not won a statewide election this century. It's been now 25 years, I think, since the last time that a Democrat won a statewide election.
I think when I 94, Mike. Mike, you were around. I was still in high school.
That's when the state was at parity. Yeah.
So maybe 25 years since they even had somebody in office. Much
But they haven't
less
won anything in this century, yeah.
Or could potentially the right be getting lazy? Is there a potential for one thing I find interesting is that even when the left puts up a fight, it's only one of the 6 or 7, however you count, the 6 or 7 statewide races. It's literally only either governor or lieutenant governor or AG or something like that. They only put up one fight. Is the right in danger of getting lazier and not fighting as hard, and maybe something slips up?
I think that there's always a case to be made for running this election like Texas is a battleground state. There's no harm in thinking that way. It ensures that we continue to make sure that Republicans are winning statewide office. Do I think the Democrats are going to win this cycle in Texas? No. Do I think they're going to do it in 2026? No. And part of it is, I think it goes back to what you said is, let's look at 2018. They had Robert O'Rourke at the top of the ticket. They didn't have anybody else below that. Then you look back in the 90s, and we had a pretty robust statewide ticket. And I think that the more popular candidates that you can get, each of them brings in a separate portion of the electorate to come vote for them. And when the Democrats only have one person out of 9 races at the top of the ticket, that's just not going to energize enough Democrats to show up and vote.
A recent poll that we did with WPA, with Alex, showed that Joe Biden has a 63% disapproval rating in Texas. Who are the 37% who like Biden?
Speaks to the power of fragmented information.
Has tribal politics just broken people's brain and they're like, Biden's amazing?
Well, but I mean, one of the interesting things that's happened in the course of my career, and Mike and Derek have watched this process as well, is that we've gone from a somewhat shared information environment between the various political factions to almost entirely airtight information environments for different tribes. So if you're one of that 37%, let's just say that you're not looking at the same information as the other 2/3 of the state. And bluntly, if I had the misfortune to be one of the Dems pollsters, I'd probably drink a lot more in Texas. But politics as a result, or I don't actually know which is the chicken and which is the egg, but it's a much more tribal process now than it was when I started. So a lot of the threat to Republicans, honestly, is our own tribalism, right? It's the internal fighting. That's how we can lose
Does that happen
races.
in Texas? I haven't noticed. So we only have a couple minutes left. Want to get to Q&A. Would love to hear folks' questions. Hopefully you have some for our fantastic panel here. So the last thing, I want to put you on the spot. We're going to do predictions. We didn't do a lot of punditry here, so I love that. I love that you guys gave a lot of analysis. But I do want to put you on the spot. Let's talk about November. Give me, what happens in Texas in terms of the presidential. I think we all kind of know what's going to happen there, but give me some analysis if you think. And then just nationally, what do you think is going to happen? Who wins, Trump or Biden? Mike, you first.
That's a good one.
You have to answer. You're on my panel. I told you this in the prep. We're going to have to answer this question.
the best thing that Trump has going for him is Joe Biden. The best thing that Biden has going for him is Trump. And 2016 was an election that we'd never seen before where the candidate with the higher negative image, in this case Trump, won. So that's something to be looking at. I would say, yeah, he's going to win. Trump will win Texas. Is it 7 points, 8 points, 9 points? It'll be somewhere in there because that's the type of state we are. It's the battleground states that matter. And in 2016, I was involved in the Trump-Pence team. We had to really look at expanding the footprint and go into the industrial states of Wisconsin and, or the Rust Belt states, I should say, of Michigan and Pennsylvania, because things like Colorado were never going to happen. And it's going to be the independent voters in those states that'll determine it. The country in and of itself leans about 4 points more Democratic than Republican. Sorry, that's the way the country votes because of big blocks like California and New York. But we just have to watch the job approval of Biden. If it stays around 40, that's big trouble for Biden. And keep an eye on the independent votes, which you can often see in crosstabs that are posted in Real Clear Politics. Mm-hmm. And,
So I appreciate the filibuster, Senator, but I'm going to need an answer. Who wins in November?
Who wins in November? I would have to say, because of the job approval of Biden, I'd say it'd be Trump.
Derek?
Joe Biden wins Texas by 60%. No.
Okay, you're off the panel. Alex, what do you think?
Trump wins Texas, and I think Trump wins the election. Joe Biden's, we talked about the youth vote. Tell me how Joe Biden can energize voters under the age of 30. I mean, he's 60 years older than them, and that's one of their key voting blocks is younger voters.
All right, I'm getting the hook here, so quickly.
Two things to watch. Given the swing states, if Biden were in a disaster, he probably should squeak out a win, but he's probably not going to for two reasons. When you're reading polls, look for polls that include third-party candidates, because independents under 35 are actually more likely to vote for Kennedy than they are for Biden. And also keep an eye on places with a strong, unfortunately for Biden, there aren't a lot of Muslim voters in the United States, only about 4 million in total, but it includes pretty significant populations in urban Michigan and Minnesota, two states he can't afford to lose. So it's actually even worse for Biden than his job approval numbers look like.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. It's the sweep. Please thank my guests for being here tonight. I really appreciate y'all coming in this morning. Thank you all for being here with us.